So I'm very glad you're with us this morning at Harvest Community Church. My name is Hans. I get to serve here as one of the pastors, and glad to be with you. Sunday is always a joyous day for many. For some, it gets a little stressful, and it gets a little stressful because of tomorrow. And whatever might be coming tomorrow, whatever space you're headed into, workplace, if you're retired, how you're going to spend it. If you are a homeschool mom, okay, we have all these things lined out. So a lot of people feel anxiety headed into the next day because they know that they have to go back to work. So just a little math experiment. This is a simple math experiment, so we should all be able to do it, even me. So we can all handle this. But first question, and this will just be for the first two rows, how many hours are in a day? 20, yeah, I think the answer came from behind us, but that's fine. 24, that's correct. 24 hours in a day. Hey, let's just assume we're talking Monday through Friday. I'm leaving out the weekends for now. So if we made a nice little divisible amount of hours, and let's do 8, 8, and 8. 8, 16, 24. I can at least count by 8s up to 24. So let's just keep the balance. We're going to third the day, 8, 8, and 8. Let's pretend many of you sleep for 8 hours a night. It's already got the eye rolls. It's like 5, maybe 6. Some of you are like, yeah, we're at 10. But let's just assume we're at 8, okay? The standard, how much sleep should you get number. So 8 hours sleep. Many people in this space are in some kind of vocation. So let's say you spend 8 hours at that job. So you have 8 hours of sleep, you have 8 hours at that job tomorrow. And then you have that last 8 hours to fill with all of the other things. Now, if you're a student, you might go, I don't have that. No, you have school tomorrow. I know, ugh. You have school tomorrow. I don't know what tests are coming. I don't know what teachers will see. I don't know what classmates will see. I don't know how that's going to look. If you are retired, you might have some task tomorrow that you have been waiting to get done, something that you're going to go see. Many of you who are retired keep your lives very busy, perhaps even busier than you did when you were employed somewhere. And so you have the things going, what am I going to do tomorrow? Who am I going to see? How's this going to work? And so that's on the list. Maybe even if you are a mom going, okay, I have just babies in the house. Well, that's a big chunk of your life, and that's probably going to get 16 of the next 24 hours, plus the other 2 hours for feeding in between the last 8. All that to say, for all of us, we have something we're doing today, tomorrow, this coming week, where a big portion of our waking hours are going to be spent vocationally. School, home, job, it's going to be spent there. And if you don't have a joyful reason to do that, then half of your waking hours tomorrow could be miserable. Where you could just go, I just hate this. I hate this space. I hate this job. I hate what I'm doing. I hate my boss. My employees hate me. I don't know where the hatred is all coming from. But so many of us are heading into tomorrow going, what do I do then? How do I spend that time? And I have said this before to people that churches often do a very bad job of helping us think about that chunk of our life that we spend decades of doing. How does what we learn here affect what we do there? If what we do at work is frustrated or frustrating or feels purposeless, then how do we handle that? But I think it is fair to say that if you had, let's just say, a stubbed toe in 8 hours of your waking day, you felt it, and then 8 hours you didn't. For those 8 hours you felt your hurt toe, it'd be pretty annoying. You'd probably not enjoy walking. That's how many of us handle our jobs. I just go to it. I don't like it. I'm not sure why I do it. Just kind of clock in, clock out, do what I need to do, and move along. Now, I don't think that is how anybody in this room was created to work. Just to kind of do it. Just to get along with it. I understand the noble motivations of I'm going to provide for my family in whatever way I need to provide for my family. That is true. But I don't think that the general way God wants His creation to work is by just kind of disdainfully going through the motions and then getting done. But very often we don't have the connection between how God has wired us to work and how He wants us to do that in a way that honors Him and how we spend the rest of our time. And that's what we will look at today. The idea being, how do we better understand? How can we improve our understanding of work from God's perspective? This would have to take much longer than one sermon. So this isn't the every answer on how God wants us to work, but this is going to be a sliver of how God wants us to work with a specific challenge on how we could better bring some of our understanding of Ecclesiastes into the work that we do, whatever that might be. So how can we improve our understanding of work from God's perspective? We'll be in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 4 through 16. If you have your Black Harvest Bible, that's page 555. So very easy to find. I checked from last week. No one has taken one since last week, so you can still go grab one. They're all there. If you don't have a Bible, that's there for you. When we were buying Bibles to give to people at the church, we wanted Bibles that the staff would be glad taking home as well, like not the $1 paperback Bibles that you don't use. So these are good Bibles for you to use. If you don't have one, it's a great first Bible for you. And if you are lost, 555. It's like the fake phone numbers from back in the day, 555. So yeah, that's what it'll be on. And we'll be in Ecclesiastes 4. I'm going to read it first, and then I'll kind of walk through how we're going to see this. So Ecclesiastes 4, verses 4 through 16, it goes like this. Then I saw that all the toil and all skill and work come from a man's envy of his neighbor. This is also vanity and striving after wind. The fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh. Better is a handful of quietness than 2 hands full of toil and a striving after wind. Again, I saw vanity under the sun, one person who has no other, either son or brother, yet there is no end to all his toil, and his eyes are never satisfied with riches, so that he never asks, for whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure? This also is vanity and an unhappy business. The passage you might be more familiar with here in 9 through 12. 2 are better than 1, because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. Again, if 2 lie together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, 2 will withstand him. A 3-fold cord is not quickly broken. Better is a poor and wise youth than an old and foolish king who no longer knew how to take advice. For he went from prison to the throne, though in his own kingdom he had been poor. I saw all the living who move about under the sun, along with that youth who was to stand in the king's place. There was no end of all the people, all of whom he led. Yet those who come later will not rejoice in him. Surely this also is vanity and striving after wind. Now, as we have gone through this Ecclesiastes series, asking ourselves the question, does it matter? As we've talked about, there are familiar passages all throughout Ecclesiastes, but then they're often couched and surrounded by unfamiliar passages. And so rather than just take the familiar and go, hey, here's a familiar one, and here's a familiar one, and teach this for 75 Sundays, we're going to try and understand in the theme of the whole passage there what is going on here. And there is a theme of work and of effort and of status and of ability. And so we're going to take that theme for the morning and really break it down in 2 ways. And in order to do that, we're not going to just go right through the passage. We're going to take the world's motivation for work, and we're going to take the Lord's motivation for work. The world's way and the Lord's way. And the Lord's way is going to be one sliver of why he does it the way that he does. And we'll start very simply with this idea, and then we'll break it out into these passages. That the world's way of work leaves us empty. We'll see that in verses 4 through 9 and 13 through 16. The world's way of work leaves us empty. And these are going to always be competing in our minds and our hearts. That what does God have for me here? How do I respond in this space? How do I honor him in this relationship or in this environment or in this vocation? How do I do that? And what you'll find are these statements that we read of, this too is emptiness. This too is vanity. This too is a striving after the wind. This too is just toil. And so we'll see those passages and the kind of the worthless way that we are seeing it that don't really gain you anything. And then we'll go to the passage on doing things together and see the way that the Lord would have for us to operate. So the world's way of work leaves us empty. The first one we see is right there in verse 4. It might sound hyperbolic, like a hyperbole. And it certainly could be. There are many noble people who go into the vocations that they do because of noble intentions. But we look around and read in verse 4 this work motivated by envy, and it leaves us striving. I saw all the toil and all the skill in work come from a man's envy of his neighbor. Now, that's an interesting phrase, because you hear the author going just kind of, ugh, everybody, nobody works meaningfully, nobody does a good job, nobody does anything for others. There's that kind of statement that we'll all make at some point in time when we're by ourselves or in a quiet moment or with our friends, just being frustrated. There is that kind of idea, but just take that idea that we see. All work comes from man's envy of his neighbor. And you might go, well, that's not true. But if you actually start to think about professions and jobs and why lawyers exist, in part it is because we're trying to keep people from maybe stealing an idea. Even, I don't know if you've ever signed, don't raise your hand if you have, a non-disclosure agreement. Yeah, okay, well, I got one honest person ever signed a non-disclosure agreement, which is essentially saying if you leave here or when you leave here, you're not going to take anything here with you. Why? Because we don't want our competitors to know what we do. We don't want you to take trade secrets with us. It all makes sense. It's so funny, though, because that's even crept into the church world. Church world, and people will leave their job, leave a profession, staff will sign on, and they'll go, hey, just so you know, you can't talk about your job when you leave, which is like the opposite of the open source life that we have here with the gospel message. I'm like, no, please don't. You could talk about us. Talk about why you hate us, talk about why you don't. That's fine. We trust you. It'll all be fine. But there's just this whole world of competition and greed and envy that sneaks in. Why? Because the world's way is kind of like, get yours. We started this company, we did this thing, you can't do it. Now, you might even think that that isn't something that would go into the church, but I have heard from the mouths of guys, I can't wait to start a church that, if I were filling the bank, that's better than all the other churches. Right? Like, I can't wait to start something that is a better expression, a better thing, a better idea. We're going to do everything better. We're not going to meet on Sundays. We're going to meet on Wednesdays and Tuesdays. We're going to not do it this way. We're going to do it that way. I'm like, go for it. However, you can hear the me motivation in that if you're not careful. I want to do something better. I heard a pastor say at one time, talking specifically about church planting. He goes, I hope you in the room are not trying to pursue church planting as a shortcut to maturity. That you just kind of want to start a thing so that you can be in charge of it without doing the hard work of maturation that actually makes you a proven pastor that somebody might be willing to follow. So when you look at Ecclesiastes 4:4, you might think, no, that's not all envious. But then if you start to actually think about people's motivations, why they set things up the way that they do, the lack of sharing that even exists, and all of the competition that might even exist, go, how do you do that? How do you do that? What about this? Right? Don't tell anybody what we're doing. And you begin to see that, yes, if we are just left to the world's ways, that is an unfortunate and exhausting way of doing business for the betterment of you and not for others. Even some people's perhaps choice of career is so they can make more than another, have more than another, or fit in with a certain kind of group that they want to be a part of, which again is a selfish motivation for pursuing any kind of meaningful work. Work motivated by envy leaves us striving. Now we get into 5 and 6, and 5 and 6 are a bit of a weird one. Okay, I want you just to know that. 5 and 6 are weird verses, and how do they fit? So I'm going to call this work motivated by activity or inactivity. So, hey, I want to do nothing, or I want to do a whole lot. And both of those leave us unfulfilled. So we look at verse 5. The fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh. What? Becomes a self-cannibal. Like, what does that mean? So let's understand in wisdom literature that fool is often somebody who is not a believer, does not follow God, does not fear God. So the fool folds his old hands, which is usually a sign of doing nothing. We're just going to sit there like this, the end of a day, hands folded up. And then the phrase, eats his own flesh, Could mean lots of different things. Have a fun time looking at all the ways different translations try to understand eats his own flesh. I think of all the different ways it might be, the one that is perhaps makes the most sense is the fool folds his hands, and the translations that go and comes to ruin. Has nothing to eat, has nothing to do. So by idleness, you actually aren't producing work that is meaningful or is good. Some people want to have a job that requires them to do the least amount of work possible, which also isn't a good motivation. I just want to do nothing. I want to do very little. Like, I want a 4-hour work week. I just want to put in 4 hours and make $700,000. Like, how could I do that? Yeah, like that's good luck. Be famous and rich. Like that's old money. Have old money. That's how you can do it, and then make a book about it. And we'll all go, how do you do that? I don't know how to do that. Better is a handful of quietness than 2 handfuls of toil and a striving after the wind. So I want you to see the poles that we see between 5 and verse 6. Verse 5 is the fool folds his hands and does nothing and kind of comes to ruin and has nothing provided and can't do anything. Verse 6 is better is being able to be quiet, work with one hand and quiet with the other, than work very hard all the time and be exhausted. So I do think that verse 6 talks to us on the positive side about having you might call it a work-life balance. Understanding that, yes, I want to work hard when I'm at my vocation, but I also want to have times where I can be still and be quiet. And if you just always are burning the candle at both ends, that's verse 6, or not burning the candle at all, verse 5, both of those ends for your work are not good ends. One leaves you with nothing, the other leaves you exhausted. Both leave you unfulfilled. Unfulfilled. I just won't work, or I'll work a ton. Either way, you're missing out on contentment, satisfaction, enjoying what you do, finding meaning in it, finding value in it, finding purpose in it. Contentment is never doing nothing or doing everything, but it's a heart state. We all know there are times where you just have to book it, work a little harder this quarter, this week, this month, but it's not just, you don't want to get caught in 5th gear and stuck there forever. You'll exhaust yourself. Why? Because you haven't found those moments to be quiet. Better is 1 hand of quietness and 1 hand of work than 2 fistfuls of work. That's vanity, that's striving. So we have work motivated by envy and work motivated by activity level. There's a third that we see, which is work motivated by wealth, and it leaves us unhappy. This illustration shows up in verses 7 and 8. And what we're going to see is the person who works really hard and gains a lot, but has no one. They work very hard, they gain a lot, they earn a lot, but they have no one. And we'll see that in verses 7 and 8. Again, I saw vanity under the sun. One person who has no other, no son, no brother, yet there's no end to all his toil. He has no one to work with, no one to enjoy it with, no one to share it with, no one to give it to. And his eyes are never satisfied with riches, so that he never asks, for whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure? I can't even enjoy it. All I'm doing is working for it, earning it, gaining it, getting it, filling up the bank account, but I don't have any enjoyment with it. Who am I doing this for? Why am I doing this? What's the point? Maybe you've gotten to the midlife crisis where you're like, why am I working so hard? And for whom am I working? And what's the purpose of this work? The bank account's full. I should be happy. Well, if your definition of happy is having enough money, but that's often not a satisfying motivation. No one for whom I'm toiling and depriving myself of pleasure, this also is vanity and an unhappy business. But perhaps we have seen these people or been these people who give so much of their life away to work. And they're lonely. And they're exhausted. And sure, their Christmas gifts are cooler, but even that rings hollow because they don't have any meaningful, relational, personal connection to people. They don't understand why they're doing what they're doing. Let's not be foolish so as to think that we might not go through 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years of our lives just kind of on a conveyor belt. Just doing the things people ask us to do and moving in the ways people ask us to move and, taking on whatever responsibilities people ask us to take on without actually considering how I fear the Lord in this space. And so we get toward the end of it and we go, what was it for? Why did I do it? What was the purpose? What did it mean? Work motivated by wealth leaves us unhappy. The Bible has a lot to say about wealth. I could quote hundreds of verses about wealth right now, the pursuit of wealth, and you'll find varying statements by Jesus, by Paul in the Old Testament, by Moses, by Solomon, by David. You'll find different statements about wealth. And trying to find the theology of wealth is not going to be the easiest project that you would try to take on this week if you were to do it. Because very often in the Old Testament, you would see God's blessing demonstrated in material wealth. That was a way that God's blessing was seen to the nation of Israel. That's the way that God's blessing was seen through Abraham. That's the way that you would follow that the Lord is with them. But so often we have taken that same mentality and assumed that if I do what God wants me to do, I have everything that I need. But we have passages like we have in the book of Hebrews, which talks in the hall of faith, talked about these people who worked hard for the Lord and actually did not get what the Lord had said that they would get, did not receive what the Lord said that they would receive, did not attain the promise. So we can't necessarily equate faithfulness and material wealth together, because some people were incredibly faithful and their reward was to get sawn in half. And so that's like not how I would like to go out. So we see that. However, you'll find New Testament passages that certainly recognize that in any church community, perhaps, there would be wealthy people in it, and instructions on how to handle your wealth in a way that honors God, and being generous with their stuff and with their works and with their home and with their money, to be generous with the things that God has given, and to find contentment not in their things but in the Lord. So the Scripture has a lot to say about wealth, and you can't follow one through line through it aside from contentment in the Lord makes everything worth it. Apostle Paul would say that. He would go, I have learned what it's like. I've learned to be happy with nothing and with lots because I'm satisfied in Jesus. What we have here in Ecclesiastes 4, 7, and 8 is that person who just works for wealth. And they get it, and they look around and go, what was that for? What was that for? I don't even have a plan for it. I just have it now. It's not satisfying. So we have a few things that we've gone through. We've seen envy, and we've seen just energy level. We've seen wealth. There's a fourth one. If we go over the cord of 3 strands passage, 13 through 16, I'm going to call this work motivated by status. Work motivated by status. Now look at what goes on here, because this is ladder climbing at its best. Verse 13 is a statement that we would agree with. Better is a poor and wise youth than an old and foolish king who no longer knew how to take advice. That is it, yeah. Rather be poor and wise than old and foolish. That statement, I think, would be true for any believer in this room. And we learn a lot even from the kids and students at Harvest about what it means to follow Jesus. Better to be poor and wise than old and foolish. Better to have nothing than to have lots and not know what to do with it. But then follow this trajectory. And I think what we're going to see is once the poor and wise ascends to the level of king, he too gets forgotten. So look, verse 14. For he went from prison to the throne. I think that is referring to the poor and wise youth. He went from prison over here to the throne. Though in his own kingdom he had been poor, born poor. I saw all the living who move about under the sun, along with that youth who was to stand in the king's place. There was no end of all his people, all whom he led. So the poor and wise youth took the place of the old and foolish king, and that poor and wise youth had a vast kingdom that many were subject to him. Yet those who come later will not rejoice in him. Surely this is also vanity and a striving after the wind. So, yes, it is true to be poor and wise is better than to be old and foolish. But if you're not careful, poor and wise becomes old and foolish. Because you've lost where you are and what you're to be for. So if we have a life that is endless ladder climbing to move from one space to another and to fulfill the American dream, and then in that lose out on fear of God and faithfulness to Him, then all we do is are on that cycle of rinse and repeat, where we become forgotten because our whole goal was to achieve a certain level of status, and once we get it, we go, why do I have it? So there's this observation that we step back and read, which is, though there was no end to all His people, everybody that He led, there's going to come a time where the people who come later aren't going to rejoice in Him, won't care about Him, and will move on. This too is vanity. Now, in all of these ideas of work or effort or toil and striving, the things that we might put in, you can find threads of nobility to them, to lead faithfully, to be strong, to be good, to be industrious. All of those are very good things. But we have to remember that Ecclesiastes is moving us toward, if we just live life under the sun, if we just pursue things here in the here and now, and we just consider it and process it in our own hearts, we will not get to the spot where we get to rejoice in what God has done and see life in the fear of the Lord. I have been a pastor who has replaced pastors, and I have been a pastor who has been replaced. And one of the biggest gut checks is when, like, the next week they meet. It's happened to me, and everybody's fine. And I'm like, I mean, come on, guys. Like, I know that I don't live in Baton Rouge anymore, but could you not have had, like, 1 week where everybody wore black? Like, one moment where you were a little sad and you just had like a weeping and wailing service. I just need one. But more than that, it's like, hey, man, we love the new guy. He's great. I'm like, yeah, cool, yeah. Glad he's great. Glad you're having a good time. Glad everything's going fine, or better without me, actually. That's great. It means a lot. So I've lived it too, where you get to a spot where you love the role you're in, you love the leadership that you give, you love the people who care for you, and it seems so significant. I would walk back into that room this morning. If I were there this morning, maybe 50 people would know who I am, and the rest would be like, hey, this is your first Sunday? Nice to meet you. How long have you been coming? Would you like to become a member? All the stuff we ask you, right? Would you like to become a member? Have you taken this class yet? Have you met so-and-so? Do you know who our kids person is? Like, no. I hired your kids person. Like that, something like that, even though I didn't. The pursuit of climbing ladders is pointless. Ladders break. Ladders break. They don't matter. And if we don't have a healthy dose of humility with regard to how we live and how we work and how we operate, we will find ourselves unhappy. So let's go to God's way. God's way of work. I'm going to use this phrase, motivated by connection. God's way of work, motivated by connection, leaves us satisfied. This cuts against the world's way of work, which is focused on me, myself, and I, focused on earning and gaining and status and you. So in the world's way of work, you are at the center. In the Lord's way of work, others are at the center, being together, because this is how God has wired us, God has created us, God has made us. So we'll see this in 9 through 12. Now I'll just break this up very, very easily for us and leave us with one idea, really one idea in 3 statements. God's way of work, motivated by connection, leaves us satisfied. The thesis of that idea shows up in verse 9. 2 are better than 1. 2 are better than 1 because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. Verse 11. Again, if 2 lie together, they keep warm. Now, this will cross some HR boundaries, so don't do this one. Two lie together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, two will withstand him. And even further, a threefold cord is not quickly broken. So you have that thesis idea in verse 9. Two are better than one because they have a good reward for their toil. It's better to be with others because they have a good reward. Now, just by show of hands, and I'm going to be the first one up, how many of you hate group work? Hate it. Yeah, thank you very much. When it's like, hey, we're going to do a group project, I remember in college one time, they were like, hey, we're going to do a group project. If you don't like group projects, you can be doing all the work by yourself. And I was like, give me that one. Give me that one. Don't trust anybody else here to do a good job. So I'm going to do it and I got it done faster and better than the group work people. So that's the story I tell myself. Don't know if it's true. So we might hear this and go, oh, no, not group work. Ugh, I hate group work. I hate group work. Well, let's just think about it for a second. Let's assume the people who are going into group work have the same motivation. Okay, let's not assume that you get the person who's selfishly motivated, they just want to ride your coattails so they can get your grade. Let's assume that for the sake of argument that both people or all people in this group in 9 through 12 are after the same thing. Because if they're after the same thing, then you're often very happy to work with them. When they know they're on the same page and they're pursuing the same ends, you're very happy to work with them. So we have the thesis there, and then you see very simple benefits to work with others. The first benefit in verse 10 is you get lifted up. One falls, the other can help. Woe to him who is alone and falls, and there's not another to lift up. Think about the world that this was written in. You work in fields. You're in agriculture. You're out there toiling, and you fall. There's no life alert. You're done. You see ya, right? You're going to get exposed and die. And so even to be able to go, help, right? That's such an important thing to be able to have and to be able to receive, is somebody else to lift you up and go, hey, let's take care of this. The keeping warm, two together, they can keep warm. Their presence is a warmth, a benefit. And you stay safe. You stay safe. That's why there are so many pack animals. When we're together, less likely to be attacked. What do good predators know what to do but to corner the weakest one? And so we have all of these benefits of being together, and yet don't we push against that? Because we assume the other person's motivations, the other person's heart, the other person's ideas, maybe they're not pure, maybe ours aren't pure, maybe they're going to steal our ideas. So what? Being together is more important than being alone. But what does this mean for us? How do we get it? I think everybody here gets it. You're here. You're here, you have God's word, you're worshiping together, you know it's good to be together with people in your circles, but very often we don't bring those people into our circles into that half of our waking hours where we get frustrated or we don't know what's going on. What do we do here? So how do we actually bring others along with us? That's going to be my challenge for us, is to bring others along in our work. How? How do we do that? Because I would say this, for all of you who have any vocation at all, and if school's that, or parenting's that, or your job is that, whatever it is, there is meaning for it, and God designed you to do it in this season and in this way. So why do we struggle to bring Sunday morning into Monday morning? I think part of the reason is because we don't know in many of our industries how to bring connection into it. We bring solo effort, striving, what am I doing, why am I doing it? I just don't get it. So to bring others along in our work, it might seem easy, but it cuts against the flow of life. I was talking to a friend right before this, and he goes, and it requires humility, which is we don't just dole out in doses in the world. It requires humility to bring others along. I'm going to give you 3 different ideas that have different levels of difficulty to them. So the 3 ideas are this: phone a friend, borrow a strength, or create a space. Phone a friend, borrow strength, or create a space. We had to work this with the staff when I was up here practicing my sermon for them, and they just sat right there. I preached my intro to an empty room on Thursday, minus the staff. And I sat here at this thing, and they were giving me notes on how to improve these ideas, and this is what we came up with. Phone a friend, borrow strength, or create a space. Now, I want to walk through each of these, and they have ascending levels of difficulty for us. How do we work with others? Recognizing that God says it's a better way for us to work. How do we actually do this? First step is going to be the easiest step, is to phone a friend, and that means pray for me. I would love for you today to call somebody in one of your circles and just go, here's what I'm coming up against this week. Can we take a moment and pray for it? That's all I'm asking. Because in that, you are now including another in what's going on. They may not have the same employer as you do. They might not be in the same industry as you are. But you're bringing somebody else into your work to go, I have an important meeting today. I have a difficult conversation with a staff member. I have to have this hiring decision I have to make. I have to go and decide, like I have a grumpy customer I have to go see. Can we just take a minute and pray for what is coming on? So that's the first way. Bring somebody in. Phone a friend. Literally phone them, text them, call them, FaceTime. Don't care how you do that part. But what you're doing is you're asking them to come into your life and to pray specifically for what's going on. Because in that moment, what do you gain but a champion? How was it? What happened? What do you need? Are you happy it happened? Are you sad it happened? Like you now have somebody, and you no longer have to process what went on alone. And so it's one way to gain connection. If you have a test coming up this week in school, phone a friend and go, I have a test. Will you please pray that I give the time needed to this test and that I can recall what I need to recall when I am going through it? Phone a friend if you're retired. I'm going to go spend the week with my grandkids so that my kid, my in-law, my child can go out and have fun. So it's grandpa week, it's grandma week. And just pray that I can make a meaningful impact in their life while I'm with them one-on-one for the next 3 days. Phone a friend. The next one is borrow a strength. Borrow a strength means help me. Here's what I mean by that. I know that you guys are great. Everybody at Harvest is great. If this is your first Sunday, I believe by faith you're great already. Don't even know you. If you don't know my name, I don't know yours. I'm sure you're great. But you don't have it all. So to borrow a strength means when you have things that you must do in your work, maybe it's leading a meeting, maybe it's having a difficult conversation, maybe it's making a development plan for staff. Go to somebody in your life who's good at it and go, will you help me do this? Maybe there's somebody in your workplace where you're on a project and you're actually not the best at one specific aspect of your project, and there is an employee that you don't like at all who actually is very good at it, to humble yourself and go to your coworker and say, hey, listen, I know you're really good at this. Can you please help me? Can you help me accomplish this? Can you help me do this part of what I need to do? That's a little different than just calling a friend and going, hey, pray for me. It's actually walking over to somebody and saying, help me with this. I don't know what to do. I don't know the best way to do it. I don't know how to lead this meeting. I don't know how to talk to my boss about this thing. I've never done that before. So borrow a strength of somebody else to help lift you up when you're dealing with whatever you're dealing with. The third one, create a space. This is a harder one. This is the third tier. If you can do this, you've already done 1 and 2 in some way. The creative space is asking somebody to join you in growing in whatever it is that you're doing. So you go, hey, will you meet with me for the next 6 weeks and we discuss the idea of work? Can we meet in a little accountability group for the rest of the year and just talk about our jobs and how to do better at our jobs, how to be more faithful in our jobs? And then when the year's done, we don't have to keep going. One of the reasons so many of us don't join these kinds of things is because we're like, do I have to be in it forever? Does it stop ever, or I just have to like perpetually just meet with you? And by like the 8th meeting, I'm kind of tired of it. But now I'm guilty, and I don't want to leave because I don't want to make you feel bad. So I'm very big on creating end dates so that somebody can go, yeah, I would be glad to meet with you in the mornings at 6 a.m. on Mondays as we get ready for our work week, and let's just pray for the people in our lives that we're about to go see and that we would have a gospel impact in the places God has put us. I'd be glad to meet you. I'll be glad to have a conversation on the phone with you every Monday morning on our way to work to pray about what we're doing and what God would have for us to do in those spaces. Those are 3 ways we can include others in what we do. But I also know we have many here who are retired or approaching retirement, and I would say you can do the same kind of thing there. You can create a group of people in your circles who are committed to handing down a gospel legacy to children and to grandkids and to pour into others and to go, hey, so that we don't just live the last 10, 15, 20 years of our lives doing whatever we want, let's create a space where we can regularly challenge each other to be sure that the things that we're doing make the most sense. The money that we're spending makes the most sense. The people in whom we are investing make the most sense. Let's create a space where we can do that and challenge one another toward a more holy and joyful pursuit of God, to have others come along with us in what we do. So my challenge to you is to take one of these 3. Take one of these 3 this week and do it. 1 is a one-time. 2 is going to take you a little longer because they're going to have to actually help you. 3 is going to take the longest commitment, but let's just put the max commitment at 6 weeks. Maybe you'll do it for 4 weeks, maybe you'll do it for 5, but just make the max commitment 6 weeks to go from now until Thanksgiving or the end of November. Let's just talk for 30 minutes a week about how we can be more faithful in the spaces God has put us. So whether you're 1, phone a friend, 2, borrow strength, or 3, create a space, it's a unique way that we are able to live out this idea that God's way of work, which is built on connection, is a more satisfying way to pursue what we do. Even if the person who comes alongside you excels at something that you're not good at, we still get to rejoice in that. Because the goal isn't our climbing, it isn't our wealth, it isn't our status or our effort, but it's the building up of others, which is what we want to be about at Harvest.